Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boardroom Club today to our Unicorn Conference, which featuring an executive from company worth over $100 billion. And today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than SolarEdge CEO, Ronen Faier. Ronen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's a real pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah, definitely. And I also joined here by my friend and a classmate of mine, Alvaro Jimenez. Alvaro?
Happy to be here, Yossi.
Yeah, so Ronen, the way we have been thinking about it is to ask you a few questions about your past experience, about SolarEdge, and then a couple of more questions that submitted in advance from the audience. Sounds good?
Sounds perfect.
Yeah, so we thought, Ronen, actually to start by asking you what brought you to the tech industry in the first place. We know that you did a bachelor degree in accounting and later on even MBA. So what brought you to the tech world? And maybe later specifically we'll ask you about SolarEdge.
Sure. So my mother would say that I knew very much that I'm going to be a manager in a tech company when I was young, because, my mother was a nurse. My brother is a doctor, and I was volunteering in the equivalent of the Israeli Red Cross. And when my brother announced that he's like 10 years older than me, that he's going to be a doctor, my mother used to say that I was about 8 years old. And I said that one day I'll be a very successful businessman in the tech industry, and he'll be a poor doctor, which I'll have to support financially. And I'm not sure if this is true, but maybe it paved the way. But realistically, when I always wanted and saw myself as an executive in a tech company, was very much attracted to the fast pace of tech companies, for the very vibrant and the international nature of those companies. And since I was always very much good with math, with numbers, with analytics, I thought that my best way to get there was actually through being an accountant, then a CFO, and then hopefully one day a CEO. And fortunately, it worked. There were other courses that I was thinking, like, computer science or something like this. But eventually, when I did the kind of, benefit and return, or investment and return analysis, I understood that maybe that's a way that I should look at life. And I went to finance, which was apparently a good choice, I believe, given where I am today.
Yeah, definitely. And can you speak a little bit more about like what brought you to SolarEdge? Because back then, like solar company weren't such a big thing in Israel specifically. So what brought you to SolarEdge? And yeah.
So, usually I think that you'll find it in your life that you're basically following people that you trust and you very much like. And I was very fortunate to meet Guy Sela. Guy was the founder of SolarEdge. He founded SolarEdge in 2006. He died from cancer 5 years ago. But Guy was many Israeli call him the Israeli Steve Jobs. I think it's a little bit unfair for him, because he was more of the Israeli Michelangelo. He was a Renaissance man, knowing everything. And I was acquainted to him by a mutual friend. And the first time we met, he came straight into the interview, and he told me, how do you do hedging of currencies? And he's a technological guy. And we started to talk about hedging. And then I asked him about his ideas, and he had very nice ideas. And then he talked to me and he asked what was I'm doing in another company that I worked at that time that did cellular phone. And I explained how the cellular phone is working. And apparently, it was almost a love from first sight. I very much got inspired by Guy, by the way of thinking, by the way of understanding, by the way of analyzing. And he analyzed the solar market to me in a way that seemed very logical, that this is a market that should materialize. So I followed Guy, I followed his vision, and this is how I came to SolarEdge. And the interesting thing was that, many times you see technologists and people that inspire you, and they have a very nice compass that knows how to show the direction. The one thing that was very beautiful about Guy is that not only he was right about the direction, but also about timing and where the industry will develop to. And this was about, 14 or actually about 10 years before he died. So this was amazing. And I simply followed him. You're mute, Yossi, I think.
Sorry. So
Yeah.
you joined SolarEdge only when it was only a startup, but since then,
Yes.
like the company went to be a big thing with factories all over the world in Korea and Israel and etc. So can you share with us a little bit about the obstacle of grow the company, both like geographic and maybe even like regarding different law, as at the end of the day, you're operating in so many countries and
Sure. So, first of all, the one beautiful thing about startups is that as the company grows and mature, the challenges are still there. They're just changing, and you find new challenges there. But I would say that if I need to characterize the first years in SolarEdge, these were the years of building the scale, building the ability to really grow fast in various countries, to build the manufacturing footprint for our products, to finance the company. We're a very heavy capital kind of a company, and we needed to make sure that we actually have enough money to cross this chasm of having a great product, but actually having the money to make it and to actually sell it in masses. And I would say that the way that we approached in SolarEdge was, first of all, that we had a very strong management team where everyone was, first of all, a manager in SolarEdge, but also wore a hat. So I can tell you that I was the first one to sign the manufacturing agreement with the contract manufacturer that we have and still serving us today. Even though I was a finance person, I can tell you that our VP of core technologies also took marketing. And part of the challenge was actually how do you grow and how do you scale this? So we started by, of course, hiring people. We started to make decisions that were not very trivial. For example, we knew that the market outside of Israel is much bigger than anywhere else. By the way, until today, Israel is less than 1% of our revenues. And in many senses, we decided, which is not very natural for an Israeli company, that we take everywhere around the world local people. So we hired a US general manager. We hired a German general manager in Germany. And we worked a lot on getting them what we call SolarEdge, meaning that it doesn't matter from what culture you're coming, how do you fit into the SolarEdge culture? So I would say that in the first 5 years, the biggest issue was lay the foundation for growth, bring the right people and build the management team and build the right structure. Once SolarEdge crossed the chasm, I think it was all about scale. How do you really grow so quickly in order to meet the demand for products? And how do you make sure that you maintain the DNA that you developed? But I'll add one more thing, which is very important. SolarEdge is now actually declining over the last year. SolarEdge is active in a market that is very much characterized as a boom-bust market. We call it the solar coaster. And I think that one of the things that I experience now, which is not a joy, I can tell you, but this is how actually you descale some of the company and you prepare it for the down cycle. And that means, how do you cut force? How do you make sure that you are directing monies to the right activities like continued R&D, because we're a technology company? How do you decrease and change manufacturing print? And I think that for me, first of all, it's a very humbling experience because, when you go like this, everyone is just spreading the red carpet below your foot. And now when you need to deal with downsizing, everything is a little bit less nicer, but you need to do it in a very thoughtful and in a very careful way, because we know that in this market, usually down cycles comes with up cycles, and we need to be ready for this. So it was, I would say that, from a startup to a large company and now to a slightly smaller company, it's always challenging. It never stops.
And you touch also about like raising money. When is the right time to raise money? Is it like when you can, or is it when you need?
So here, one day when I'll be very old CFO writing his book, if someone will be interested to read a book, made by an accountant, but written by an accountant, but I would say really when you can. And I want to give you an example actually from the time that we became a publicly traded company. A year and a half ago, everything seems bright in solar. The markets were growing like crazy. The demand was far exceeding our ability to manufacture. We were generating cash. We've been profitable for 10 years. And basically, we sat on $1 billion of cash. Some of it was debt, some of it was our own cash. And then the markets were open. You could see that you can go to the capital markets and raise secondary offerings relatively easily. Stock price was at 13 at that time. Today it's about 20 or 24, depends on the day. And I decided, and I pushed my board, which agreed to actually raise more money, to raise about $600 million. The downturn came very rapidly in this industry, and for us to stop the train of manufacturing actually led us to a situation where we built a lot of inventories and we burned a lot of cash. When I raised the cash in 2022, I didn't need it. I needed it today, but I know that if I needed it now, I couldn't have raised it. So, you know, if there was one advice that I will give all those of you that will become managers in successful companies, especially guys on the financial side, you never have too much money. You simply raise when you can and when the circumstances actually allow you to do it. And just remember that no company ever died because of the fact that it had too much cash.
That's definitely true. And maybe taking you to the SolarEdge IPO at a time when maybe like a company like SolarEdge, solar company, they going public was not something so typical in the market. So I was just wondering, was anything specific that maybe the investor looked for the most when you did the roadshow, or was it like any other tech company?
So I think that it was a combination of two things, and I think that we'll touch it also a little bit later when we talk about the metrics of the company. But you know, from the very beginning of the company, Guy and myself pushed it to become a fast-growing yet profitable company. And when we went public after 2 quarters, consecutive quarters of being high-growth company, but profitable company with a, I would call it trajectory of increasing profits. And when we came to the investors, we came with a very interesting story that was appealing from 3 different angles. The first one was a cutting-edge technology. SolarEdge today has software, hardware, power engineering, semiconductors. All of the technology pillars were there, and they were very attractive to tech investors. But we need to remember that these are investors. They need to make money. And the other thing that we brought was actually the trajectory of not only growing, but growing in a profitable way that allows us to continue this growth and to continue to spread, because we're a hardware company that always need a lot of working capital. So the combination of cutting-edge technology and profitability was very appealing. The other thing that I think was very appealing for them was also the fact that we've tapped the ESG market that was at the very beginning of it. But still, investors started to look, especially in thematic funds, how to invest in ESG themes. And the fact that we were in ESG, which was a very nice and beloved theme at that time, it still is, by the way, very nice technology, and profitable was almost too good to be true. The beautiful thing was, and how did we attest for this? You know, when you do the roadshow, you start the day, you start the first day, then the second you do 12 days on the road. Actually, within 2 days into the IPO process and roadshow process, we already were oversubscribed with our order book for the IPO, and we actually ended up raising, or actually raised the amount that we wanted, but the demand for our stock during the roadshow was 12 times higher than the allocation. And I think that this was the main reason for this.
Maybe a follow-up on this, and a last question about like raising and maybe financing yourself as a company. So now that you're a public company, how you keep financing yourself, and specifically maybe in the solar industry? What you have to do? Is it like just like to do a secondaries and or like follow-ups?
Sure. So first of all, again, and right now the industry is in a kind of a downturn, and specifically SolarEdge is suffering from it. But I would say that first of all, once the beautiful thing about becoming a publicly traded company is the fact that you have access to capital markets that you didn't have before. And when you need to finance a company, and I'm not talking about distressed company situations, because in distressed situations, you simply go and raise whatever you need. But I would say that when you have the choice and the ability to raise money, there's always, and it's almost a textbook consideration of the cost of capital. When you're a growing company and you have the trajectory of growth, equity is very easy because you get the money and you never have to pay it back. But this is the most expensive currency that you actually have. And therefore, you need to find the right balance between equity and debt. For us in SolarEdge, as long as we didn't see that we are comfortable with the ability that we can raise debt and actually serve it, meaning the fact that we felt very comfortable with the fact that we can actually return the debt, our preferred fundraising method was actually to go to the capital markets and raise stocks, and this is what we did. Afterwards, we grew and we generated cash. This is, by the way, a very good way to finance the company as well. But when we needed to take the next step, it was debt, because then we saw that we can serve the debt. It was relatively cheap debt that we took. It was zero interest convertible debt. Then when we needed to go back to the capital markets, we looked at the ratio of debt to equity and we said we are not comfortable to take enough or more debt, even though it's a little bit cheaper, and then we took stock. So it's always this balance of how do you make sure that you keep the value to your shareholders, because again, shares are very expensive currency. And if you go to debt, can you really serve the debt? Can you really feel comfortable that one day when you need to return it, you can actually do this, or if you can actually refinance it?
I know that, like, okay, after you raise money, you started to grow all over the world, and I guess also growing all over the world mean also like different geography and different margin as well. So yes. How important was it for SolarEdge to keep selling their product all over the world, although maybe in one geography the margin was like much better than the other one? So maybe it get rid of the other market, or was it super instrumental for SolarEdge to keep doing it globally?
Sure, and I think it's a great question given the fact that there is no definite answer to this. And at certain times, by the way, the results will show that maybe the decision was right or wrong. You know, from the very beginning, when SolarEdge started to sell products at the very beginning of 2010, the world was a very regulated market when it came to solar. The fact was that solar installations were more expensive than the value of the electricity that it actually yielded, and therefore you needed to have subsidies in order to have solar systems being sold. And therefore Europe was the market where subsidies were the most present. And therefore we started to sell in Europe because this is where we could actually grow given the demand that was there. But we, as a company, as management, always thought that you want to be in a market where government is less active in. And we wanted to make sure that if one day regulation is changing, we're a little bit more immune. So the decision to go wide geographically was made mostly in order to reduce the risk of changing regulatory environment that can kill your business. And by the way, this was a very good decision on our part, because we started in Europe. This was the largest market. The US in 2010 or 11, it was almost a non-existent solar market, but we started to sell our products and certify them in the United States. And in 2013, when Europe very abruptly cut all of the subsidies for solar, the European market almost disappeared, but we were already well established in the United States, and we could actually grow very rapidly in the US in a way that actually overgrew the decline that we had in Europe. And then, by the way, the world is always changing. So we were very strong in the United States, but we kept investing in Europe because of the fact that we analyzed that electricity prices in Europe will actually bring solar back in an unsubsidized way. And again, these are the markets that we want to be in. And when interest rates started to grow up in the United States, when the market started to diminish because of this fact, Europe was growing at the same time, and we could actually grow in Europe. So I think that from our point of view, the geographical spread was mostly to de-risk and to allow ourselves a little bit better dealing with a market that could be changed very quickly. I would also say that in many cases, and again, I see it today, we made some decisions to grow, and after 5 years, you understand that the market did not materialize. So I think that, you know, it's always important to go into more markets, but it's not less important to look at the markets that you're active and continue to judge whether it's a market that you should stay or should pull out after you put some money. And when it comes to margins, yes, you do see the different characteristics, but I think that the right way, and especially when you're a publicly traded company, is to convey the message to investors, to explain them how the margin works, and actually to convince them that this is maybe you're in a market that has lower margins, but has much better growth trajectory, and therefore the operating profit could be higher. So this is something that you need to manage, especially when you go so deep geographically.
I was just wondering, maybe last question for myself before we go into Alvaro. So when company like SolarEdge want to grow, like to other geographies all over the world, is there any preference if to do it organically or non-organically by buying, maybe acquiring other companies in that geography? Or
so for us, it's an experience of one company in that sense, I would say. But in essence, we always decided to grow geographically in an organic way because, you know, we're a company that is an equipment maker, and as an equipment maker, you usually rely on various distributors. In the United States, we have today close to 50 different distributors. When you decide to grow in a geography in an unorganic manner, you basically need to buy a distributor in order to penetrate this market. And that means that you're actually starting to compete with your potential customers. So for us, growing geographically in the core business was always organic. I would say that when we wanted to go into new areas, for example, e-mobility or storage, whether it was a good decision or not, when we wanted to go into a different proficiency that we had, then we decided to do it unorganically, especially if it was outside of our core markets. But in general, in our core markets, always expand geographically.
yeah, definitely. So Alvaro, first of all, Ronen, thank you very much for answering all my questions.
Sure.
And Alvaro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yossi. Ronen, you talked a little bit about the solar industry, and I want a little bit more information on that because I find it very interesting. You mentioned how you first went into Europe because it was a very clear market opportunity. However, then the subsidies disappear, and me being from Spain, I read all the time the news about these huge lawsuits against some of the companies because the government stopped paying these subsidies, and it's not very clear if this was completely legal or not. So I'm interested in the residential and commercial part of the business and to know what kind of clients are the ones that you are pursuing. So not particularly in any geography, but in general as a company.
Sure. So our products, we're an equipment manufacturer. So that means that our clients would be usually distributors, but actually these are not the end customers. The end customers will usually be either installers who are installing the systems on people's roofs or organizations' roofs, or actually the house owners themselves. I can tell you that, you know, the solar industry, however, is really very interesting because it passed very quickly through, I would call it 2 or 3 different stages. In the first stage, making solar was more expensive than buying electricity from the grid. And that means that it was either an industry for environment lovers. It's not a big enough market, by the way, to really expand the industry. And this is why it was a market that was always existing, or at least until 2012, by getting subsidies from the government in order to encourage solar. Because the idea was very simple. In an equipment area, you grow by scale. And when you're scaling, costs are going down. And when costs are going down, economics start to work. So the European governments decided to push by subsidies the solar business and the solar equipment manufacturers by giving subsidies. By this, we were able to grow. We were able to get to a scale that brought solar installations in 2012 in the majority of the Western world into a situation called grid parity. That was a situation where actually buying kilowatt from a solar system was equal at cost to buying it from the grid. And from that point, because of the fact that you actually started to see costs of technology going down, it became a very economical market by itself. And then it moved to the second stage of really growing just because of economics. But then during this second stage, came a very interesting or problematic, depends on how you see it, situation where if I'm a solar system owner, which I am, today it's cheaper for me to buy or to make electricity on my roof. But since I'm not consuming it, I'm pushing it to the electricity company, to the utility company, to the grid, and I get paid for this. And at a certain point, the utility started to lose money because on one hand, I was free riding the grid. I was not paying from the infrastructure because I could sell whatever electricity on the grid. and then I became cheaper than the grid itself, and then I have a bigger advantage. And then you started to see around the world changes in the industry where you either started to see what's called net metering based on time of use. At times that you had a lot of solar energy, you got less money when you paid it to the grid, while at night you paid a little bit more because you couldn't generate solar. And in some markets like California, you started to see actually utilities pushing out some of the solar companies because of the fact that their cost of capital was high and their investment in utility grid didn't make any sense. And then when you started to see these kind of changes, you actually needed to shift again the solar products from just being products to harvest the sun energy. You actually need to have a system where you have a solar PV array and a battery in order to install it, and a software that allows you to actually manage the grid and the interaction with the grid. For example, today, I'm not sure if it's in Spain, but in Germany, for example, in a very clear sunny days, because of the fact that there is too much solar, you're getting paid to consume energy. You pay in order to push electricity from the grid. So today's SolarEdge system is not just harvesting energy from the roof. If the rate is now negative, the system knows to go to the internet, to get the data, and then to decide whether I want to continue and harvest energy and fill the battery. Maybe I want to stop the system and charge my battery. And this is the next stage. So it's a very quick evolution from a just kind of cash cow a product that can yield cash into an economic product, into a product that needs to be much more sophisticated. Now, between residential and commercial, it's almost the same dynamic in a different magnitude and a different, I would call it, characteristics. For example, for a home, maybe it's just important, to save money when you're generating the electricity, and you don't care too much of other factors like a company. In a company, I may say, okay, it's very nice to have a solar system, but if I do this, I'm actually very good in ESG reporting to my investors. And my investors think that my stock is a little bit better because I'm greener. If I'm a homeowner, I don't care that my inverter is connected to the internet and actually everyone can hack it. If I'm a commercial company, I'm very much afraid that someone will be able to penetrate my network because I don't have cyber capabilities. So I'll look for a product that has cyber capabilities. So it's the same, I would call it basic layers, but some of the elements of the system are changing between residential and commercial.
And a lot of what you've been saying is because such an important part of electricity consumption is the industry itself, the commercial. There's a big connection there with the ESG, and like you mentioned, companies will care about this. The individuals maybe not so much. But what is affecting everybody, however, are the headwinds that we see in the current economy, in particular in manufacturing and industrial in Europe, for example, and also the high interest rates that are affecting a lot of manufacturing companies and maybe perhaps even the solar industry. So in that sense, I wanted to ask you, how are these high interest rates affecting the capabilities of SolarEdge?
So first of all, they negatively impact the company, and I think that you see it in our at least in the last few years' results. But I think that it's very important to know that even though interest rates are going up, the solar industry by itself is economic today. It's an investment. You basically buy a bond and you put it on your rooftop because you know that the sun will continue to shine, or at least you expect it to happen. The technology is mature enough, and when you know that usually electricity prices just go up, you know that you just simply put a bond on your rooftop that is paying every month. And once it becomes a economic tool, you understand that yes, of course, when interest rates goes up, maybe the value of this economic investment is not as good. This is why, by the way, again, as SolarEdge, there are two things that we did. And again, by the way, we're still very heavily impacted by this. The first thing that we did is, again, going to various markets, because the US is a market that is very much characterized with borrowing. People take a loan in order to buy a system. In the Netherlands, by the way, in many cases, culturally, taking a loan is considered as not very responsible. So people are actually taking their own savings and they put them in solar. That means that, by the way, you're meeting the interest from two different angles. Of course, if you have, let's say, the same interest rates between the United States and Europe, which is not the case, Europe is a little bit lower interest rates. If you're borrowing, that means that you have higher cost of interest compared to a European person who takes his own saving, and this is like the alternative cost. So the way for us to deal with it is, first of all, to make sure that we're geographically spread again to reduce the risk. That's the number one thing. The second thing that we need to do is we need to show technologically that we can yield more electricity, that even though we're not maybe as attractive as we were when interest rate was zero, we still are a better economic investment compared to a similar risk tool that you see outside. And sometimes the way to deal with it is that, going back to the previous questions, have enough money that when the downturn comes, you can basically finance yourself through it. And then when interest rates will go down and they start to do as well, you'll be ready there. But we're heavily impacted by this.
Yeah, no, you just mentioned it, and that was my following up comment, which was the recent cuts that we have seen, and it looks like there's more to come. Europe started a little bit earlier in those rate cuts than the US. So for the financing, obviously, that's good news. But in relation to a comment that you made earlier, I was just thinking, it seems to be that the regulation pushes all of these technical innovations to countries that are maybe in Northern Europe where there's not so much sunlight, and then you go to the south where there's a ton of sunlight, and you push out the people or the companies that are trying to push this technology. And in relation to that technology, there's a new angle that you brushed by and you didn't say much, but what about AI? So you have all the technology, the hardware, but now you need the software part. And
Yes.
where do you think AI fits as a piece of this puzzle with regards to a future where, like you mentioned, you have to make decisions of, am I generating for me, or am I charging my battery and I want to plug in? How do you see it?
So actually, just by means of statistics, when SolarEdge started, I joined the company in at the very end of 2010, beginning of 11. We used to have approximately among our engineers, let's say 90% hardware engineers and 10% software engineers. Today we have approximately 40% hardware, 60% hardware and 40% software engineers, because this is where the market is going. When it comes to AI, it really comes to what we call today EMS, Energy Management System. Actually, the idea is to be able to connect to various, I would call it, sources of energy, and to make mindful decisions about how to manage the system. And I'll give you two examples. The first one is the one we said. Now you have a negative tariff. You have a battery, you have sunlight. Take all of the data that you have from your home consumption to see how much energy you consume. Take a little bit of data of how the dynamic negative tariffs are working. Is it for half an hour every day? Is it for 2 hours? Sometimes it's 10 hours. Look at your what is the weather forecast that you have. Are you going to have a storm in Florida right now? Do you want to have your battery filled up? Or actually, do you want to use it right now? Take as many as possible sources of information and have AI analyze all of the historical patterns and some of the decisions that you've made before, the system made before, and how did they really apply, and now make it a little bit of a better system. So it's a learning system, and we apply a lot of these capabilities today. The second area where you see AI today, but this I think is not very much different from other companies, is that actually how do we run our business? I can tell you that, for example, up until 3 years ago, we used to have support centers almost everywhere around the world. What we saw is that as we're moving towards more and more channels like chats, instead of just speaking to an agent, we could actually take now AI that allows to translate the chat very easily and almost seamlessly to any different language. And now I don't need to put people in Germany that are so much more expensive. I can move them to Bulgaria, and actually, at least in the chat channel, someone will, type Bulgarian, someone else will see French as a native French speaker level on the other side. So it's in our products, in the way that we implement them, and actually in the way that we actually operate our day-to-day.
Which is, I think, something that we're hearing a lot from all of these tech entrepreneurs. And this brings me to the end of the interview, which I have just a couple of other types of questions. These are a little bit more fun.
Sure.
But I suppose that aside from running a company, you have some free time. And in that free time, what would your hobbies be?
So, first of all, free time is a very scarce commodity, I would say right now, in general. But I'll think that there'll be two. First of all, running. I run 50K a week. And by the way, compared to, again, fathers of some people that I know here, maybe it's not so much, but I run a lot. It's time for me. It's almost like meditation. It takes the job away. I'm concentrating on my running, on the view, on my breath, and this is my best hobby. And it's a beautiful one, by the way, because you can do it in Shanghai, you can do it in San Francisco or in Berlin. The other thing is reading. I read tons, and I I fly almost every week, so I use a lot of airplane time to read, other than my emails, to read about less management, but a lot of novels, a lot of biographies. I really like biographies. And I'm trying to read a lot also about science and areas that are a little bit different from where my day-to-day is. I think that, if you expand your mind and capabilities in one area, it actually contributes in the other areas as well. So running, reading, everything that you can do on travel on a plane, this is what I'll prefer to do right now.
And in 10 years' time, when hopefully you have led a very successful career in SolarEdge, where do we find you?
Great question. I think that it's going to be in I would call it doing for the benefit of I would say a cause or something like this. We live right now in Israel, which is a complicated place. Politically, from security point of view. One of the things that I do see, for example, and I see it by the way in other political systems. Systems I think become a little less working towards or governments towards the people. And one of the things that I view myself is either working in a non-profit organization. This is a benefit that SolarEdge allowed me. It has been generous from monetary point of view. I would like to spend my time doing something good. I did choose to do something good by joining a solar company, but maybe being a teacher, maybe being I don't know, to help financing solar systems for people that have a little bit less of capabilities. I would like to find myself in a non-profit organization.
We have in the audience one of our professors, Andrew Davis, who's a operations professor, and so in 10 years, if you're looking for a job, maybe you can reach out to him.
Just let me know I'm coming.
All right, thank you so much, Aaron. Yossi, back to you.
Yeah, so Ronen, thank you so much. It's really been a blast. We learned from you a lot, and obviously, like all the people later on will see the video, and we learn from you same as us. So we super appreciate your time here, and yeah, thank you for just like joining us. And
Very
actually,
much.
you are the last speaker of the Unicorn conference. So we saved the best for last.
Thank you very much. And I want to say one thing, some of them, you see the picture, some of you, I see the faces. There was one thing that I will tell you, and again, talking from my 54 years of age, enjoy this time. If there's one time that I would go back right now, even if I didn't appreciate it enough, was the time of being able to study and really allow myself to expand my horizon and learn. So enjoy it. It's a gift that I'm not sure that you know how to appreciate right now. One day you'll do. Enjoy it and appreciate it now. Thank you very much for having me, and I very much hope to see some of you or one of you in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining us.